Have you ever thought about what goes on behind the closed doors of the world's biggest companies? We see the shiny commercials, the perfectly curated social media posts, all designed to make us open our wallets. But what if I told you there's a whole other side to these brands, a side they don't want you to see? While they sell us dreams, there's often a darker reality lurking in the shadows, a reality of exploitation, manipulation, and shocking disregard for the very planet we live on. Today, we're pulling back the curtain, shining a light on the uncomfortable truths about some of the most famous brands you thought you knew. Let's start with a brand that's practically synonymous with America, Coca-Cola. That fizzy, sugary goodness that's been refreshing us for generations. But what if I told you that, behind that iconic red logo, lies a company that's been accused of some pretty shady practices? Coca-Cola once secretly funded studies to shift blame for obesity from sugary drinks to a lack of exercise. They poured money into studies that emphasized physical activity while downplaying the role of sugary drinks in weight gain. It's like a tobacco company funding research that says smoking is good for your lungs. Coca-Cola is one of the world's biggest plastic polluters. Every year, billions of plastic bottles end up in landfills and oceans, harming wildlife and ecosystems. And what does Coca-Cola do? They launch flashy recycling campaigns, making us believe they're part of the solution when, in reality, they're a major part of the problem. It's the epitome of greenwashing, making themselves look environmentally responsible while their actions tell a different story. This is a classic case of a corporation prioritizing profit over the well-being of its customers. They knew the health risks associated with their products but chose to manipulate the narrative for their own gain. Now let's move on to a company that's become a staple of modern life: Amazon. The retail giant that can deliver practically anything to your doorstep with the click of a button. It's undeniably convenient, but have you ever stopped to think about the human cost of that convenience? Amazon warehouse workers face grueling conditions just to keep up with the relentless demand. Reports have emerged of workers enduring 10-hour shifts with barely enough time for bathroom breaks. Imagine being so pressured to meet targets that you have to choose between relieving yourself and keeping your job. There have been reports of injuries, of workers collapsing from exhaustion, all while being treated like cogs in a machine rather than human beings. Amazon has been accused of predatory pricing practices, undercutting smaller competitors and driving them out of business. It's time we acknowledge the dark side of Amazon's success, the human and ethical costs that are often hidden behind the allure of convenience and low prices. Let's talk about fast fashion. Those trendy, dirt-cheap clothes come at a hidden cost. Someone, somewhere was paid a pittance to sew it together. Many fast fashion brands source from factories in developing countries. These sweatshops have unsafe and inhumane conditions. Remember the Rana Plaza tragedy? Over 1,000 lives lost. The fast fashion industry is a major polluter. Chapter 4: Apple, the tech giant built on e-waste. Now let's talk about a company that likes to present itself as sleek, innovative, and environmentally conscious: Apple. They've got us all convinced that we need the latest iPhone every year, even if the old one works perfectly fine. But what happens to those old iPhones, those discarded MacBooks and iPads? They end up in landfills, mountains of electronic waste or e-waste piling up at an alarming rate. E-waste isn't just harmless junk. It contains toxic chemicals that can leach into the soil and groundwater, posing serious risks to human health and the environment. Apple has been accused of making their devices difficult to repair, encouraging consumers to buy new ones instead of fixing the old ones. They've even been caught slowing down older iPhones through software updates, a sneaky tactic to nudge people towards upgrading. Reports of worker exploitation, unsafe working conditions, and even suicides have plagued the tech giant for years. They talk a big game about ethical sourcing and labor rights, but the reality often tells a different story. Chapter 5: Oil companies, drilling for profits, destroying the planet. Let's move on to an industry that's been wreaking havoc on the planet for decades: the oil industry. Fossil fuels are a major driver of climate change, but these companies have spent years downplaying the science, funding climate change denial, and lobbying against environmental regulations. They knew the risks, but their greed for profit trumped any concern for the planet. When their drilling operations inevitably lead to environmental disasters like oil spills that devastate marine life and coastal communities, they're quick to shift the blame and downplay the damage, They're now trying to rebrand themselves as champions of clean energy, investing in renewable energy sources like solar and wind power. But don't be fooled by this greenwashing. Their investments in renewables are a drop in the ocean compared to their continued reliance on fossil fuels. Chapter 6. Facebook, the price of free is your privacy. And finally, let's talk about a company that's become deeply embedded in our lives. Facebook. It's the social media giant that connects us with friends and family, allows us to share our thoughts and experiences, and collects vast amounts of data on our every move. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. They're in the business of making money, and that money comes from selling your data to advertisers. Every like, every share, every comment, every article you read, every video you watch, it's all being tracked, analyzed, and used to build a detailed profile of you, which is then sold to advertisers. And let's not forget about those endless scrolling features, those notifications designed to keep you glued to your screen. The more time you spend on Facebook, the more data they can collect and the more money they can make. They've created a platform where lies can spread like wildfire, where algorithms can amplify the most extreme and divisive content, all in the name of engagement and profit. Outro: the power is in your hands. So, there you have it, a glimpse into the dark side of some of the world's most famous brands. We've seen how they prioritize profits over people and the planet, how they manipulate us with marketing tactics, and how they operate with a shocking lack of transparency. But here's the good news. We don't have to accept this. We have the power to demand better from the companies we support. We can vote with our wallets, choosing to buy from ethical and sustainable businesses. We can hold these corporations accountable by speaking out against their harmful practices. And we can support organizations that are fighting for worker rights, environmental justice, and a more equitable world.